Chapter 24. Flash forward, mistake. I stared at Farron, unsure what he was asking me. How many times? Farron nodded. How many times have we seen each other again since you started shifting between worlds? The question caught me by surprise considering the violence of the battle going on around us, but I managed to reply, 2. Well, 3, including this time. Farron nodded. I thought as much. I'm finally catching up. I'll explain things soon, but we have to get you aboard the Orzammar. I turned and looked around to see the dwarves holding back a tidal wave of oily black humanoids crashed against their defensive line. I was back in Thedas, that much was certain. I knew the world intimately, and my stone sense washed through it with the familiarity of slipping on well-worn shoes. This was my world. And more importantly, these were my people, my children. Regardless of the different worlds I'd been to and the different titles I'd been given, I've always considered the dwarves to be my true people. I'll handle this, I said with conviction as I prepared to help the soldiers in their fight. No, Merida, Farron said as he reached out and grabbed my wrist. He turned me around to face him. You can't. They're giving their all for you right now so that you can get to the shuttle without having to engage the enemy. Normally, Farron's grip was like iron, unbreakable and solid. However, when he turned me, it was like my body turned on its own to simply do what he wanted, as if it knew instinctively that he wouldn't be able to budge it if it hadn't acted. His grip felt like tissue paper, even though I could see his knuckles whitening as he clutched me. He was holding me tight, but I didn't really feel the strength in his grip. In fact, the only reason I understood that he was holding me was because I felt his skin on mine. I didn't feel the pressure. It was similar to a baby grabbing an adult's finger. With all its strength, you could easily forget it had a hold on you. I didn't understand why he wouldn't want me to help our people, especially when I knew that I could. But at the same time, my motherly instincts didn't care. I pulled my hand back and shook my head, giving him a stern expression. No, Farron. I will not simply escape when I can help my people. Merida, no! You don't understand! Farron protested. Please, don't! The rest of his protest fell silent when I noticed the golden thread had appeared once more. It was leading away from the battle and towards a shuttlecraft, hovering a meter above the ground. I'd learned that following the thread led to positive results, but instincts simply wouldn't allow me to leave when my people were fighting. I turned away from the thread, and as I looked back at the battle, everything was so slow. It was as if time had come to a crawl. Plasma rounds, bullets, and other munitions moved slower than snails through the air. Every combatant seemed almost frozen in time. I called upon my magic, the sensation of Thedas's familiar energy like a warm blanket around me. I wove volatile arcane energies into hundreds of thousands of compacted pink spheres that appeared over the battlefield. Within those volatile little spheres, I tucked churning nuclear energy that rested in the sphere's cores, waiting for violent eruption of the spheres to trigger their activation. The battlefield, a city with futuristic-styled buildings made from materials I was quite familiar with, lit up with the glow of the spheres. Time returned to its normal pace as my magic-infused voice carried out across the battle. You will harm my children no longer. A mental command brought the spheres down to bury themselves into the bodies of the oily black creatures. As the arcane energy of the spheres began to react with the impact, Farron whispered in surprise, Merida, what have you done? Just when he'd finished asking the question, the pink hue of the light from the orbs erupted in a single blinding flash of irradiated fury. There was nothing left of the enemy forces but dust that was carried away in the wind. Thousands of dwarves turned to look in surprise and awe at me as I stood there, eyes burning with magical light, hair billowing in magical wind, and a mother's rage etched upon my face. I let my gaze wash over them. I will not leave my children behind. I turned and looked at Farron, who seemed shocked and somewhat disappointed. I'll leave this planet only after they're safe. Farron took a slow, deep breath, then gave a consigned nod. As you wish, my dear. Farron opened a communication channel. All enemies have been eliminated by the Empress. Send ships to escort the men from the surface. Empress Orodum will not leave until the soldiers are safe. Within a few minutes, troop transport vehicles raced through the sky to pick up the soldiers. A group of guards stationed themselves around us and kept a perimeter as Farron summoned a pair of stone chairs for us to sit on. It had been some time since I'd seen his stone manipulation, and was impressed with how easy it came to him now. He'd never had my range, but he'd clearly been working on it. I took a seat. Why didn't you want me to help in the fight? A question you should have asked me before you did what you did, Merida, Farron sighed. He looked at me as hunched forward and knit his fingers, together, in his lap. There were people watching that battle trying to gauge our worth as allies. Recovering you was a sort of test to see if we could handle the enemies we will be facing. They would have stepped in and aided us if they needed to, but we nearly had you out. If you hadn't intervened, we could have guaranteed the alliance. Now, I'm not so sure if they'll take us on. My face tightened. What sort of allies wouldn't simply lend aid to such a mission? Why would we want to be allies with someone who thought we needed to prove ourselves? Merida, my love, you have to understand that we've done everything we could to keep our people from disappearing, Farron explained. We never could manage to get Thetis revitalized again, but we were able to contain the atmosphere enough to remain underground. Reach out, and you'll be able to tell that the planet is mostly lost. I didn't have to reach out. I'd been a part of Thetis so long that it was like a second skin to me. I could sense the cities and infrastructure woven through the planet's crust, like intricately designed tunnels. The structures were still built into the stone, and the hollowed portions that contained all of the towns and cities were spaced enough to support the planet's crust perfectly. The only problem was that there really wasn't any movement. No people. All of them had been abandoned. The only real movement was in the area we were located in as the soldiers prepared to leave. My eyes widened in fear. Fear, not for myself, but for my people. Farron, where are my children? What happened to the dwarves? We've already evacuated the planet, Merida, Farron replied, knowing the impact that admission would have on me. We made sure the civilians went first, then scaled back the military presence until you and your protective detail were all that was left. Abandoned? I whispered as the hollow, empty cities echoed in my mind. Why? Because of those things you saw us fighting, Farron said. Thedas is in their path as they try to move to the galactic center. What was that? A female voice barked from behind me. Lord Orodum, what happened here? We detected a massive spike of dark energy before the invading husks just disappeared. What did your people do? I stood and turned to see who was speaking to Farron in such a way and gasped. A blue female humanoid with a subtle scaled texture, large purple eyes, and flowing head crests that looked similar to small, stationary tendrils marched toward us. She wore a tight suit of black combat armor that accentuated her tall, lithe figure and carried some kind of futuristic rifle. She was accompanied by 5 others of her kind, all similarly dressed. I turned to look back, a Farron who had already stood and moved to my side. Is that an Asari Delegate Basella? Farron bowed his head in respect. May I introduce you to my wife, Empress Merida Orodum. The mother of dwarves? One of the other Asari gasped and stepped out of the formation to gawk at me. She quick-stepped to me and stared at me as if I were some kind of long-lost artifact. She looked up at Farron. You said she was in stasis. All your records showed she hadn't woken up in... She's standing right in front of you, I reminded her as I looked up at her, still slightly irritated by Farron's reaction to how I'd helped our people. The abandonment of our home. and the way the delegate had spoken to Farron. The Asari gasped and looked down at me. I apologize, Empress. We've been studying your people's records, and you've been a primary focus of my studies for months now. I never expected for you to just wake up. In fact, we were all baffled when your people insisted they get you off the planet as well, and by how many lives they sacrificed just to keep you safe. I whirled on Fair and stared at him. How many? Merida, Farron said, trying to calm me. No, Farron. I shook my head. How many of them died holding off those things? We don't know yet, Farron admitted, but it was substantial. The soldiers that are boarding the ships now are only about a tenth of what was left here to keep you safe. My eyes filled with horror as I looked at the formation of soldiers preparing to be escorted off the planet. My voice came in a trembling whisper. There are tens of thousands of soldiers here, Farron. He pulled me to his chest and wrapped me in an embrace. I know, my dear, but the ones who fell gave their lives happily so that you would be safe. I don't mean to ignore the sacrifice of your people, Basella said as she tried to bring our attention back to the matter at hand. But I still need to know what that dark energy signature was. Nothing we've seen before has ever been able to cause that much destruction, short of nuclear attacks, but they certainly aren't so selective in what they destroy. So, I have to ask again, what was that? Farron looked up at Balassa as he tried to comfort me. He knew how much I hated any harm coming to our people, especially when it came to them because of me. It was the Empress, Farron replied. She did it. Ridiculous, Balassa scoffed. You expect me to believe your wife wiped out nearly 500,000 of those creatures all on her own? I turned and locked teary eyes on the Balassa. I'll thank you to use a respectful tone when addressing my husband, Delegate. If you don't believe him, I conjured more of the same type of magical spheres I had before. Their appearance and light alerted the soldiers that I was preparing another attack, and the closest of them realized that I was focusing my attention on the Asari. They began to raise their weapons at the small group of aliens. I can always demonstrate my abilities for you one more time, I said with a warning tone. The group of Asari stared at the display of power, some in shock, some in amazement, fear, awe, and even curiosity. Balassa held a hand up to signal that she didn't want to fight. I apologize, Empress. I didn't mean any disrespect. We've simply never seen a biotic with as much power as you before. I dismissed the orbs, and the soldiers began to slowly lower their weapons. I'm not a biotic, I replied. I'm a mage, probably the most powerful one to exist in Thedas. A mage? The other Asari asked as she looked at me. From everything that I've witnessed, you're using biotics, Empress. The energy signatures, the command paths from the brain. All of my scans and observations read you as a biotic. But you're not using biotics in any way we've ever recorded. Could it be that what your people call a mage is what we call biotics? And what you call magic is what we've categorized as dark energy and mass effect fields? Anything's possible, I said, knowing that statement to be more true than any of them could fathom. Who are you? Empress, Balassa said. This is my team's science officer, Celeria et Ari. Celeria bowed her head. It is truly an honor to meet you, Empress Oradum. You have been a truly fascinating individual to research you. I've never encountered a culture so fixated and dedicated to anyone or anything more than your people. My children humble me in their admiration, I replied. Before I could continue what I was going to say, Celeria let out a short, excited gasp. Your children? Does that mean you see the dwarves as your actual children? Is that why you call yourself the mother of dwarves? Farron cleared his throat. If you please, the Empress needs some time to process everything that's happening. She'll be happy to answer your questions later. But, for now, just know that she won't be using that level of biotics again unless absolutely necessary. Now, Can you please allow us to get to the Orzammar? We can host you there once we get settled in. Of course, Lord Oradoom, Balasa replied as she bowed her head respectfully. Compound bows are an excellent suggestion, Your Grace, Serena said with an appreciative grin. I was back in Westeros just as suddenly as I had been taken to Thedas. I paused mid-step for a moment to get my bearings. We hadn't walked more than 20 feet since I'd been transported back to Thedas. Had it really all happened in a series of several steps? I looked up at Serena and hummed. What was that, Lady Cowsland? Your idea for issuing compound bows, Serena replied. I think it's an excellent idea. Wait, I'd been talking and interacting with everyone even while I was back in Thedas? Does that mean I'd somehow swapped places with the me from that time? When I'd appeared there, I'd been heading toward the shuttle with Farron, so I had to have been aware of what was going on. And Farron had asked if I was flashing between worlds again. He even asked how many times I'd been back to Thedas. Did this mean that this was going to keep happening? If it did, it meant that the me from the future had decided to make a suggestion while she was back here. So it would seem that regardless of when it happened or which direction in time I was flashing to, I'd always been in control of myself one way or another. Still, compound bows really was an excellent suggestion. Extremely easy to draw. Fires further than normal bows of equal draw weight. Not as much training as a normal longbow require to be proficient. I can draw up the schematics tonight, I grinned. We'll get craftsmen to start producing them soon enough. I still have my doubts that every soldier can be an archer, Randall commented surly. But if your grace believes it can be done, then we will endeavor to see it through. Thank you, Lord Tarley, I replied, as my mind began to wander to other modern additions I could implement into the army.